Hello and welcome. Brett here with Clickmill.co, and in this video we're going to be talking about church volunteer burnout, why it happens, and how to stop it. So we're going to do this in 3 simple, fast steps, and here we are in step number 1. We're going to look at how the average church is breaking down their resources and where they're allocating their resources, okay? And as we begin, I just want to introduce you up here at the top to Pastor Pete. Pastor Pete is having a really tough day. He's burnt out because his time, attention, energy, focus, and church financial resources are just spread super thin. And you can see he's got his little Bible here and a frowny face, and he's just having a really tough day, just barely getting through. Here we'll see, these are the new visitors. You'll see me kind of hovering over here. These are the new visitors, and here are the returning guests. Then we have the leaders, and then we have the staff. And that might just be Pastor Pete by himself, or maybe there's a team of Pastor Petes, and they're all burnt out right now. But either way, where are we putting the majority of our resources? And usually, in most churches, at least here in the United States, we're putting tons and tons of resources to getting people's attention, getting the attention of visitors, first-time visitors, and getting them to come back that second week, getting them to commit to our church and build that relationship. And once they come to our church, we still put some resources into them. We're still trying to meet those needs and the wants, and we're getting them plugged in. But the one-on-one attention we're giving them is a little bit less than those new visitors because we're really courting them, we're really chasing them. So we're giving the returning visitors a little bit of attention, and then what do we do with our leaders, with our volunteers? Well, once we kind of get to know these people, they're in our church, we kind of pop the question and we go, hey, we would love it if you served XYZ, and they say yes. And once we get them in there, typically what we do is, there's only a limited amount of training or resources or time devoted to these people because they're leaders, like Pastor Pete, who's kind of running the show here, at least to some degree. And what do? We go back over here once we get the leader, the new volunteer in place, and we go and we're all focused back on the visitors. Now, this makes sense to some degree because we want to get those new people engaged in our church. All right, here we are in step number 2. So here down at the bottom, you see number 2 pop up here, and we have our handy dandy trust commitment scale. And our trust commitment scale goes from 1 to 10. Now, before we really get into this scale, what I specialize in is marketing. And one of the things that it goes with marketing is relationships and people. If we don't understand relationships and we don't understand people, then we can't understand marketing. So one of the things in terms of healthy relationships that we need to understand to make Pastor Pete feel better up here is that trust and commitment go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. And the way that I want to just kind of think about this is, if you're married or if you're in a relationship, I'll assume you're married. What happened the first time you saw the person who would be your spouse, right? You started a conversation and you got down on one knee and you said, marry me. No, of course not. That's not what happened, because that would be really creepy. That would be weird. Because why? Because the trust in the relationship does not meet that level of a commitment, okay? And so if at first sight the trust is a 1 and the marry me is the 10 commitment. So that's way, that's movie stuff, but that's not real life. What happens when we first meet our future spouse? Well, we talk a little and we say, hey, it was really great to meet you. How about we go out and to coffee? And in the back of our mind, the other person, whoever was the recipient of the question, says, do I trust this person enough to commit to coffee? Now, as the relationship builds and the trust gets higher, we went out once, okay, this person's sane, this person seems like they love Jesus. What happens? The trust goes up and the trust goes up. And how does the trust go up? The trust increases because we're meeting each other's wants and we're meeting each other's needs. What types of wants and needs does your spouse have? A need to be loved, a need to feel safe, a need to be heard. And so as you're courting and as you're dating, you're fulfilling these needs for each other. And this increases your love bank to overflowing. And over the course of, a year or however long, what happens is the trust builds to 10. As the trust goes to 10, it's only natural for the commitment to go to 10. And it's actually even unusual if the trust gets to 10 and there's no commitment, because it actually begins to feel unsafe. I trust this person so much and they're not committed to me. So now I'm actually feeling uncomfortable. So the commitment has to increase with the trust. And what happens? One of you got down on your knee and then you said, marry me. And then the commitment came up to the trust. We build the trust in the relationship and the commitment follows. Up here with Pastor Pete, he's always asking me, how do I get people to commit to being a leader? And not just to commit for the first time, but to follow through and to continue doing it in such a way that, they're not burning out. Because then all of this falls back on your shoulders and you're burning out. And so what I would say is it's not about commitment first. It's about the trust first. Now, the second thing I want to point out with number 2, before we get into our last step, is, what happens when you get into, when you get married, and you've probably seen this 100 times with people in your congregation where they're newlyweds, they're happy, everything's going great, and then things start to get a little tough for them. Why is that? Well, they got busy. They, with kids and with work and with financial issues and with, now they're starting to see each other's, some of their faults and some of their edges. And what happened? They've stopped meeting the needs and the wants as much as they were at the beginning. And so the trust is going down a little bit, right? And so the relationship, that love piggy bank isn't quite as strong as it was. So let's go back up here to number 1 and let's see what's going on. We get our new visitor and we give them the most attention, just like, 2 people do as they're getting to know each other before they're married. And hey, come to coffee and come back to church. And they say, okay, great. And that trust is building, but we're giving them just a little less time, attention, energy, focus. And then we say, hey, marry me, right? Go ahead. Come on, be a leader. We trust you. We, commit and let's make this thing happen. And they say, great. And then what happens? We go back to the front door and we start courting new visitors. And we often leave the leader to sort of fend for themselves. And what happens when we do this is they've committed to us, but we are breaking their trust because we're no longer continuing to meet the needs and to meet the wants for love and safety and to be heard and all of these things. And so the leader is pouring out faithfully, but because we're not pouring anything into the love bank, they run out of something to continue pouring out into your ministry. And if you've heard some of my other videos, if you've been to some of the trainings over on clickmill.co, you'll know one of the huge principles that we operate on is a win-win principle. And that means that your leaders, your volunteers, anytime you ask anything of anyone in your church, in your marriage, anywhere, you should always be giving 2 to 4 times the value you're asking for. And as long as we do that, no one's ever going to burn out. So with that, we're going to move on to step number 3. All right, welcome back. Here we are in step number 3. And what I want to look at is how do we fix this dynamic where we're putting all the attention and energy, or at least a large majority of it, into new visitors. And how many new visitors are there? How many people in the church are there? Just tons of them. And so Pastor Pete up here he's all tired. He can barely keep going. And when the leader finally commits, they actually begin to lose trust in us because we're not meeting their wants and their needs as much as we were when they committed. So they begin to feel like maybe we don't care about them, and this was all just about getting them to take some of the work off of Pastor Pete up here. So how do we do this? Well, let's look at Jesus and how he structured his ministry. Now, in this specific video, I'm not going to go really deep into a lot of verses, but I think you'll follow with me here. In Jesus' ministry, he spoke to the masses, and that's the M out here. And we see him speaking to the 4,000, the 5,000. So Jesus is working with the masses, but he's not giving the majority of his time, attention, energy, focus to the masses. Where's he giving it? He's actually giving it to the disciples, the three first. He's got his inner group, and those are the guys that get exclusive access. When we're talking about the transfiguration, a little less so. He's giving tons of time, attention, and energy to the 12 disciples, right? All of them. He's explaining to the disciples later all the details, but when he was talking to the masses, he only gave them in parables and what they could understand. So he's giving these people out here baby food, and he's giving these people in here meat. And so Jesus is giving more to the 12, and then he's giving some, time, attention, energy, but to a lesser degree to the 72, because again, they're closer to the masses. And then finally, the masses he's giving the least to, but this is still a lot. He's still healing them. He's still meeting needs. He still cares about them deeply, but he's allocating it almost exactly opposite of how Pastor Pete's doing in this church. And this is why Pastor Pete's so tired, because Pastor Pete's allocating and just spreading his time out to the 4,000, the 5,000, and there isn't enough time or attention, energy, or focus. So he's barely making it. But what do we see Jesus doing? He's filling the 3, he's filling the 12, okay? And as he does this, he sends them out. He sends the 12 out. He's filling the 72, and he sends them out. And so they're doing ministry to the masses, probably more so than Jesus is, because he's filling these inner core leaders and he's building them up. He's replicating himself. And so this is how I see Jesus's leadership model, how he allocates his time, attention, energy, focus, and I would even argue his money. We know he had money from 2 very wealthy female benefactors, and he's obviously allocating that as well. And who's spending the most time with him? The 3 and the 12, who are managing the finances. And so again, we see these going outward, not inward. What are the benefits of this? How would this change Pastor Pete's ministry if he were to adopt this method of allocating time and all of these things? Well, firstly, so he's actually going to be rewarding leadership, okay? What do I mean? Well, over here in this model, Pastor Pete is rewarding the visitors for essentially doing nothing, just showing up. And the more they commit, the less they're given. So he's actually de-incentivizing them committing, because as soon as they commit, they actually get less. So they, subconsciously here, it's like, well, if I were just to go and not do anything, Pastor Pete would give me more of his time, attention, and energy. So we're actually pushing them away by using this model. Over here, what happens is, as we see Jesus, he's talking to the masses. He goes up and he talks to the fishermen, Peter, James, and John, I believe, and he goes, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." He invites them into the inner groups here, and they say, "Sure." And then what happens? Jesus begins to allocate teaching and training and discipleship and all of these things because they've moved into the 12. Okay? What do we see with the rich young ruler? He's out here in the masses, and Jesus says, "Come on in, follow me." And he says, "Well, what do I need to do?" And he says, "Well, okay, the last thing you need to do is give away all your possessions." And he says, "No." And we don't see Jesus chasing him and saying, no, please, come be a leader, okay, or anything like that. And so as people commit to Jesus, Jesus gives them more. I think ultimately we see that as we commit our life to Christ, as we accept his salvation and commit in the largest way, he commits in the largest way to us and allows his blood to cover our sins. So just another example of that. But either way, here we see that leaders are actually incentivized to become leaders. We want you to grow, and the more you grow and commit to our ministry, the more we're going to commit to you and train you and pour into you and disciple you and prepare you because, and we'll get into because in a minute, but anyway, it increases the volunteer ability. Well, this is fantastic. Over here, we're talking to the masses. Pastor Pete over here is spending all his time with the masses, but he's not spending a lot of time training his leaders. So his leaders don't feel competent and capable to do the tasks he's asking, which then makes Pastor Pete feel burnt out all the more because now he's going back and he's redoing things and he's frustrated because they're not doing things right, or whatever it is. Over here, Jesus is preparing the 3, preparing the 12, preparing the 72 to go out. And what happens is he leaves the picture entirely, right? He ascends back up into heaven, and what happens? They're fully autonomous. They go, obviously with the Spirit, but they go and they're taking care of business because they were fully prepared, because Jesus put that time, attention, energy into them. Now, it maintains a healthy relationship because as they move in and commit more, you're committing more to them. You're committing more time, more attention, more energy to them. So the trust continues to increase as they move further into the core of your church, which really, really builds that healthy relationship. Instead of over here, where they're moving further in and committing more, and Pastor Pete is actually committing less because he's chasing the masses. 2 more here. Pastor Pete reduces his load, all right? So what do I mean by load? I mean the number of things he's trying to do by himself. And I think this is notorious for pastors. I went to ministry school for 4 years. I was in youth ministry for a number of years, and it can be incredibly stressful because you're doing all kinds of things. You're not just preparing sermons, you're running a church. When you are replicating yourself, you decrease the load because you're rewarding your volunteers with, essentially discipleship, and they can be you in other areas of your ministry, and they're going to be competent to do so. And then lastly, this increases Pastor Pete's efficiency. And you can see Pastor Pete over here. He's standing up now. He's got his Bible in his hand. He's smiling. Poor guy's only got 3 hairs left because he just barely escaped all the stress and frustration. But it increases his efficiency because he has competent volunteers, okay, here on the inside, helping him carry the load. And he's not expending all his time, attention, energy, focus on the masses. He's actually reduced the amount of time he's spent going after people and increased the amount of people helping him, which further decreases how much effort he has to expend. And his results are probably better. All right. I just want to thank you so much for being here with me in this video and giving me the time to just explain how this works. Please, if you found this video helpful, subscribe, ring the bell, like the video, just do all the things. And in another video, we're actually going to be using this exact same model, the 3, 12, 72 masses, and we're going to apply this to your website. And I think that, we've got a lot of churches moving online, and you're going to find that this is hugely helpful for your online ministry as well. So we're going to get 2 birds with 1 stone. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. We'll look forward to see you soon. God bless, Pastor.